I've just started the recording. And I think the other thing that's important for me to stipulate right now is a caveat. We are not making the decisions about how grants will be awarded. This is our interpretation and our opinion only, based on the information that is available and based on our experience and knowledge. So please remember that this is, there are no guarantees. We're just doing our best to provide you with information and support as you consider options here. I'm Kathy Arney. I am president and founder of Key Canada. We are a leading nonprofit consulting firm specializing in helping nonprofit and charitable organizations build capacity, mobilize their mission, and maximize their impact. Here we are led by the guiding principle that every organization has unique needs. We walk with you, tailoring our approach to provide you with the responsive and proactive service while supporting and enhancing your capacity. So I'm really happy to introduce you to the team. We have a number of the Key Canada team on the call, and I invite you all to introduce yourself and as well as the guests on the call in the chat, so you get a chance to know who's in the room. But I specifically want to introduce Emily Bocking and Linda Whitaker, who are fund development and grant writing experts on our team. Linda is based here in Canmore and Emily in Saskatoon. And over time, they have helped nonprofits secure millions of dollars in grants for a large variety of projects. I'm grateful for both of them for taking the time to quickly digest the details that were provided Friday and to share with you today. I also want to acknowledge the work they have done, among other things, in recognizing the need for nonprofits to increase their success around grants. And they collaborated to create our first key learning course, Grant Writing 101, which we're really pleased and proud to have available. And you can see that through our website if you're interested. So the plan for this hour is to have Emily and Linda provide an overview of the grant opportunities and requirements, and that'll take approximately 20 minutes, and then we'll follow that by Q&A. So my job will be to advance the slides and also to monitor the chat. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat. Please do keep your mute on unless you're speaking, so that we avoid any of the background noise. And we will do our best to get to your question. If for some reason we don't, we'll certainly be happy to do so after the fact. So with that, I'm really pleased to hand the baton over to Emily, who's going to start the chat.
Thanks, Kathy. And hi, everyone. Thank you for making time and joining us. This is the first time we've done this. And so it's exciting to be able to tell you more and hopefully have that good conversation about all the things that we need to talk about. So as you may know, in December, the Community Services Community Fund came on board. It is very much focused on helping charities recover from COVID-19. There's $400 million available. And the purpose of the fund, and I'm going to read this, is to strengthen the internal capacity of community service organizations facing immediate and long-term impacts of the pandemic. The interesting keywords here are strengthen internal capacity.
Almost good now.
So, this is a competitive process, definitely, and it's important to remember that. But we never see a grant available for internal capacity. It's basically the equivalent of a unicorn. And not only is it the equivalent of a unicorn, it's a unicorn jumping over a rainbow and landing in a pot of gold. So, it is competitive. I want to make sure that that's clear. But if we could go forward one, Kathy.
Yeah.
So through this fund, there's really three pillars that you can look at. So it's supporting your people, investing in systems and processes, and investing in program and service innovation. So, what does that mean? So supporting your people is very much about your current and future employees, your volunteers, and members of the board of directors. So some examples that are in the guide include creating human and volunteer resource structures and policies, recruitment, retention structures and policies, mental health supports, training for staff, diversity, equity, inclusion, and any other activities that really focus on well-being, retention, and keeping people with you would be my understanding. Pillar 2 is interesting. This is about creating basically that critical infrastructure that you need in order to improve resilience. So things that will help you be more effective could include implementing a database or hiring support to create a communications plan or a fundraising plan, enhancing or purchasing, frankly, a new accounting system, looking at a governance review with the lens of organizational resilience. There's a whole bunch in there that you can really look at. And then finally, program and service is very much focused around lessons that you've learned through the pandemic and looking at redesigning. So maybe you had to adapt a program while you were in the middle of COVID, and you want to put that program, a virtual version of your program into formal play, or you want to test our pilot program that was redesigned or adapted due to COVID, or you need to purchase equipment or other materials to make that happen. The best example I have is, let's say you're a symphony and you couldn't gather for a year, and so you started doing virtual performances, and now you want to buy good recording equipment. That would be an example of that kind of system. Let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. So who's eligible and what does community service organization mean? It's interesting because it's actually open to pretty much everyone from what we can tell. There are some caveats. I would recommend you look at the application guide. But if you're a nonprofit and you're either unincorporated or incorporated, you are eligible. If you're an Indigenous governing body, you are also eligible. If you're a registered charity, you are eligible. And if you're a qualified donee within certain parameters, you are also eligible. There really are some exceptions that are interesting and important to look at those before moving forward with your application. Now the fun stuff, right? So it's not only who is eligible, it's what else do you need to provide them. And this is the list of the other eligibility criteria. I won't read it all. I want to flag 3 main things. One is being in good standing with the CRA or your provincial regulatory body. So filed provincial annual returns would be an example. The other one that really stuck out to us was internal accountability measures in place. So that could be internal controls on banking. And it could be, as simple as having 2 people signing checks, a budget, and an audit. Those kinds of things would help qualify you and provide that eligibility. And the last one that was interesting to us was having a bank account in the name of the organization and a financial management system to track your income and expense transactions. So those were kind of the big ones that stuck out to us. Obviously, governance is important, and important again to check through these areas as well. So the next question really is how much can you apply for? And the reality is it depends on your scope and your project progress. So there's 2 categories really. There's the local which is a local category, which is related to serving a portion of a province or territory. And then there's the provincial or national or territorial category. And that's about serving an entire province or multiple provinces. So within each stream, there's 2 tiers, right? So within each category, there's 2 tiers. Tier 1 is 10,000, 100 grand. Tier 2 is 100,000 and to 200,000 for local. The deal and the criteria for applying for tier 2 is that you must be in the implementation or stabilization phase. So you need to have the project underway, and you need to be working with another community service organization, and you both need to be benefiting from this project. So that's local, and I keep trying to advance the slides. For tier 2, it's for provincial and national. There's the tier 1 level, which is 20,000 to 200,000. And for tier 2 applicants, it's 200,001 to 500,000. So again, the project is already underway, and it's carried out either in national, provincial, or territorial offices, or it is structured as a national community service federation or representative association, whereby the member organizations will benefit directly. So next slide. The reality is that, and it's in the guide too, we expect that the vast majority of applications will be submitted in either the tier 1 stream in the local or the tier 1 stream in provincial national. It's, that's just the reality. So Linda, would you like to follow up?
Sure. So hello, I'm Linda Whitaker. It's nice to be here today, and it's quite an exciting opportunity that we have here. Once you've sort of read through the application guide, and I would mention that at the top of the chat, we did put a few links to the fund's website, to the application guide, and to a decision tree that is important. So that those links are already there for you. So how then will you decide what fund to apply to? Your organization is going to want to determine whether you're a local or provincial national organization, which hopefully is fairly clear. Also, whether your project would fall into the tier 1 or tier 2 criteria, which, as Emily mentioned, probably is tier 1, except in some special circumstances. And then the third piece of information you'll need to know is what kind of project you're applying for, whether it's the people, processes, or programs. So on the next slide, there is this link to the decision tree. As I mentioned, we expect that most of our clients and the majority of the applications will be coming in through these 3 project focus areas, and can then determine which application portal you're going to want to engage with. So for the people projects, you're looking at the Canadian Red Cross portal, for systems and processes at the Community Foundations portal, and then program and service innovation is being handled by United Way. It's useful to note that the Canadian Red Cross and the Community Foundations each have one portal only for each. The United Way seems to be distributing it across their member organizations. So if, say, you're in Vancouver, you're going to want to look at the United Way Vancouver website. If you're in Calgary, and so on. The assessment criteria is really one of the areas that we think you want to pay some attention. These are the criteria by which the funding decision makers are going to decide whether or not your project is approved. It's important to keep in mind that it is competitive, that not everything will be approved, but that by keeping these assessment criteria in your mind while you're preparing your application, you're increasing your chances of success, because you'll be communicating more clearly with those funders how your project is meeting their goals and priorities going forward. So I'll look at the first assessment criteria, which is how the COVID-19 pandemic influenced, affected, and shaped the operations of your organization. So really looking at what happened in 2020, 2021, how your organization was impacted, what your organization learned from that experience, and how that learning is going to inform your project going forward. So an example might be an organization, a foundation, say that in the past had earned a majority of their income from galas, you know, the nice events we all used to go to. After a couple of years of not being able to hold those galas, they now find that they're in a position where they don't have the capacity anymore internally, where their partners in those galas are no longer interested, and the viability of that type of activity just isn't there anymore. So that they're needing to look at some other project to help support the organization going forward. The second assessment criteria is that the project be viable and that it can be implemented during the project timeline. So all of the activity and expenses can only be incurred between May 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. So that's just over a year. The announcements of the awards will be happening in April. So there's not a lot of time between understanding that you've received some funding, the time of the project being open and being closed. So you might be tempted to kind of cram as much as you can into the work plan to maximize your financial request, but I would discourage that because the assessment process is going to look at whether or not your organization is able to implement that particular project in that given timeline. So Emily's going to look at the third and the fourth assessment criteria, I think.
Yeah. So number 3 is that the proposed project will help the CSO adapt, modernize, or build resilience following the COVID-19 pandemic. The best way to answer this would be to link back to the answers that you provided in number 1 related to how did your organization become impacted from COVID, and then use that answer sort of as foundation for how the proposed activity will build resilience for you. So going back to Linda's example about the hospital foundation and the gala and how they're losing money, and they're not as robust as they used to be, one option would be to establish a major gift program, and that through that diversification of revenue channels that you can start to be more resilient and adapt to what community needs, or I guess, help you adapt to society in a way, or what the needs are. Another example would be, let's say that you're having trouble holding retaining employees, and that 90% of those who have left the organization in 2020 and 2021 have identified training as a key barrier. And you're applying for training dollars to help your staff be more resilient. That would be another example. One key to remember is to really focus on the impacts that you've experienced in 2020 and 2021 as a direct result from COVID. Those will really help you with this project and with moving forward. Number 4 is about equity lens. So the questions to answer, we did go through the application. The questions that are in the application are: describe how your organization actively brings an equity lens to all aspects of its work using the principle of nothing about us without us. And does your organization consider itself to be led by one or more of the following equity deserving groups? So an equity deserving community as defined in the guide includes women, Indigenous peoples, Black Canadians, other racialized communities, language minority communities, people with disabilities, and 2S LGBTQIA+. It can include other groups. There could be rural remote would be an example of another group that may be considered more marginalized. What's interesting about this is this principle of nothing about us without us is very much recognizing the idea that people with lived experience know what is best for themselves and their community, and that their participation is integral to the success of the program. So these two are very big questions. So some examples would be of, things to think about are like, do you have a DEI policy? Do you have equity deserving groups on your board? Do you have a plan to recruit equity deserving groups? Do you engage regularly with the community you support, and how does their feedback inform your work? Those are questions that you can use to help establish your commitment to engaging in the principle of nothing about us without us. I hope that makes sense. So this really is a great opportunity, and we rarely see an opportunity like this. We're about to dive in a bit into the guts of what the application asks you for. And so I'm going to work through the project plan, timelines, and activities, and then we'll move forward from there. So when you get in the document, one of the things that they'll ask you for is a work plan. And this is really your timeline for your activities. My advice, and following on what Linda was saying about assessment criteria number 2, is one, to make sure that you're not over-promising what you can deliver within a 12-month time frame. The second thing I would say is bake into your timeline contingencies. And so if you think it's going to take a month to hire someone, if that's what you require, then it might be a smart move to double that to 2 months. So really thinking through your work plan and your timeline. Project deliverables is essentially your milestones. So you're going to show them what new tools or strategies or approaches that will be developed as a result of this project. It could be a milestone might be secure 2,000 hours of staff training to support mental health well-being. And so then you would show what kind of training you're able to provide. The project results is the ultimate outcome. So our organization is more resilient, through this project, we'll be able to generate more financial stability, which will result in a more resilient organization. The last thing to talk about really is the mission and the mandate. So yes, it's important to talk about how this will benefit your organization, but it's more important to bring it out beyond the organization to the beneficiaries and the clients and the people that your organization serves. So, going back to the hospital foundation, if there's more funding available, well, that means that we can offer more programs and supports to members of our hospital community, including doctors who are doing research, including patients who require additional enhancements and treatment help. So you really want to take it out to your beneficiaries, if that should make sense. So moving forward, I think, Linda, it's budget time.
Yes, so I'm the CPA here, so the budget tends to fall to me. This application process, each of the portals of the 3 providers, the Community Foundation, United Way, and the Red Cross have very similar application processes, but they are slightly different. The project budgets appear to be quite similar and fairly straightforward when it comes to sort of the general world of grant applications. The link in the application guide, or the application guide to which there is a link provided, does share a fair bit of information. And the interesting points that I would note is both the timeline on the expenditures, which we've talked about before, and also that there will be a reporting period and some sort of reporting required after June 30th, probably August and September of 2024. That reporting will require documentation to support the expenditures, including salaries, overtime, any purchases, copies of invoices, and that sort of thing. So just be aware of that when you're putting your plan together. It might influence your decisions about complexity, and also making sure that you set up your systems in advance to track any of those expenditures separately in order to make your reporting easier at the end. The ineligible expenses are sort of the usual for this type of application. Things that are not allowed are gift cards, alcohol, cannabis, legal penalties, taxes, entertainment, all the fun stuff. They're not allowing purchasing of buildings or land. Sort of makes sense given the timeline and the intention of the grant. One other thing to note is that there is an exclusion of eligible expenses that are costs associated with profit-making activities. So if you're planning on, say, opening a cafe to support your revenue needs, you might want to get in touch with the funder prior to that application, just to double check that this is not falling into that category. I mean, I understand that they're trying to avoid profit-making activities in the general sense, and because it's such a broad group that they're dealing with, that makes some rational sense, but it could be a bit of a gray area depending on the type of project you're looking at. The next slide looks at eligible expenses. The application requires them to be grouped into 6 categories, and then an automatic application of the 12% administration fee, which is quite generous and thoughtful of them, I thought. With respect to personnel, the application requires a description and then an amount. Personnel is the full cost of any positions. So you'll want to describe the position, the time period, a brief description of what they might be doing, saying implementing a volunteer recruitment strategy, and then the full amount, which would include things like employer CPP and EI costs, EHT if you're in Ontario, any group insurance premiums, that sort of thing. Contractors such as financial consultants, HR consultants, web designers, maybe program evaluation people, fundraising planners, that sort of thing would fall into the contractor area. Materials and supplies are consumables, so items under the project that would be consumed during the process of the project. Things like brochures, notebooks, small signage, that sort of thing. You want to remember that you are going to have to provide invoices for all of these pieces, so maybe not getting too detailed or thinking more in bulk of materials and supplies would be helpful on your administration office. And also recognizing that smaller things would be covered under the 12% administration fee. Project equipment would be your capital assets that you might be purchasing. So things like, laptops, cameras, heavier and larger assets that you'll track and go forward with. Travel expenses must be reasonable and related and based on per diems and mileage rates that are common in your area. And training and events are expenses related to that. So room rentals, refreshments, and so on. The other area that you will have to comply with is to provide required documentation. There's not too much that's unique here, but you will want to start getting prepared and have your incorporation documents ready, any provincial registry documents, your most recent tax filing. So you want to get in touch with whoever is responsible for those. T1044s, if that's something that you file. Well, 1 year most recent financial statement, and those should be signed by your board and on letterhead if they're prepared by an external organization. You do have an opportunity to add annual reports, donor reports, any other newsletters and information that you feel might support your case. And also any other letters of support from participating organization or groups would also be something that you could include in your application. I think this is always a nice opportunity to demonstrate the capacity of the organization, that you have these things available and that you are working in the same area, that your project is in the same area that you have been working in over a course of time. So taking advantage of these opportunities to share more information is always useful. And then I think Emily's just going to wrap up, and then we'll be able to take some questions.
Yeah, the one thing we wanted to flag for you was the issues that do exist, or that we found. We're kind of and the one that we cannot emphasize enough is making sure that your proposal links back to the impact of COVID-19, and specifically the impact of 2020 and 2021. That is the most important thing. The other thing we found interesting was that they are linking into sustainable development goals, which are found at this website. You can have a look and have a sense of where you fit and how your project will be supported, and even how your organization will support the SDGs. We talked about the equity lens question. Happy to talk about that in another way, or with anyone who needs that time or that help. And then the one last one that I'll mention before we, or the two things that I'll mention. One is that, you know, partial funding is considered depending on the project. That becomes an interesting conversation with the funder. And then the last one is that there is a webinar on January 12th that's being hosted through, I believe it's Community Foundation. So if you haven't signed up and you have questions, that would be an opportunity to ask them. And I think that's everything for now.
Thanks very much, Linda and Emily. Really, really helpful go through. And again, we will be making this presentation available through our website. But now is the opportunity, if you have any specific questions, comments. I know there are a couple of people on the call who are connected with Community Foundations of Canada. If you have any comments or input or thoughts, welcome you to speak up and add any advice or insights you have for that. And if anybody has any other questions or clarifications, we would welcome them now. We just have our first question. Jill says, could we apply for a vehicle for a local car share program for nonprofits? Emily or Linda, do you have a?
Sure. Well, on the, what am I looking at? I'm looking at the applicant guide, and on page 12, there is a list of eligible expenses and ineligible expenses. Vehicles are listed neither as eligible or ineligible. So I would, my initial reaction is that yes, it is possible. Tying it back again to why it's needed with respect to COVID-19 and what you learned during COVID-19 would be important. And I would recommend actually with a idea like that, reaching out to the funder in advance and just having a conversation, asking that question and seeing what their feedback is, because each organization can only apply for one project. So if the response seems favorable and that your rationale for requesting that project makes sense to them, then that seems viable. But at the same time, if you have other projects that might be more likely to be successful, you may want to consider that as well. So a maybe, I guess.
Okay. Thanks very much, Linda, for that. Gord Holly asks, are community foundations eligible to apply?
My interpretation is yes, they are. There's the last category within the eligibility criteria related to working with, I'm just trying to find a phrase so you have the specific name. So it philanthropic intermediaries and volunteerism promotion is one of the opportunities within the eligibility criteria. So I reread that, Gord, as community foundations. Linda?
I would just note that on page 9 of the application guide, right at the bottom, under ineligible organizations, it does say the Canadian Red Cross, community foundations, and United Way, Centrades, and collaboratives in which these organizations are a member fall under ineligible organizations.
Yeah, so we're not, it would be important to ask. The other interesting thing is because many community foundations are administering grants, they're, I'm not sure how they would handle that. I guess.
Or how it would be adjudicated, yeah.
Conflict of interest. So, so great question and probably worth a double check on that, Gordon. Let's see, we've got Johanna asking, is there any advance payment upon a successful application, or is all funding by reimbursement? Great question.
It is a good question. I looked through the material. I didn't see any reference to advanced funding, advanced payments. So, and I did see reference to filing the documentation afterwards, which would, in my experience, imply that there is not advanced funding. Normally, when a fund asks for, it has that available in the budget application process, they ask for some sort of question of timing, which is not available here. So I would be inclined to think not, but you could always reach out to the funder and double check on that as well. I think it's always good to express your needs and desires as well, so that they have feedback going forward.
And I think, so thank you, Linda. I would also say that for that question, we might look into it a little bit further, and I will send out a short survey after this with maybe the answer to what we're able to find out in the short term. Thank you for that. Krista asked us to re-explain the funding tier categories. And then did I miss Senos? Maybe we'll skip. Yeah, sorry. Sorry about that. Why don't you go now, Senos, and then we'll switch to the explaining.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Linda. and Emily for the great presentation. My question is regarding to these three partners that would be administrating or managing these funds.
Oh dear.
Whereas United Way and the other two. Linda.
Senos, you're freezing from time to time. I'm wondering if you could maybe turn off your video. And maybe
United Way, while one is actually a member or within that United Way category. How does that work?
so we lost you a couple times in that. Senos, you froze. So I'm going to suggest maybe you just turn off your video if the bandwidth is an issue, and try repeating your question.
Oh, sorry. I'm saying that and the role that the application follow under those organizations, like United Way. So if I'm trying to apply for a stream that is not under United Way, but I am kind of working with United Way, how does that work? Will that be that one can go to any of these three organizations then?
Okay, I think I understand. So, so really your first, who you apply to is really based on which project you're applying for. So if your project is focused on people, you apply to through the Red Cross, for example. I believe I got that right. If you're applying for program innovation, then you would apply through the UW portal. But all of it's like who you apply to is really dictated by what your project is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would caution that I understand that if you apply to the wrong portal, if you apply to the wrong organization, say through the wrong portal, and your project is not qualifying in that category, that project focus area, that it will not necessarily be shared over with the correct one. So you could lose out. So you really want to make the effort to make sure that the project that you're applying to the correct organization for the type of project that you want to submit. If you have any questions, each of these organizations, the community foundations, United Ways, and so on, have good communications with respect to emails and phone numbers that you can reach out to. And so if you have any questions, or if you think there's a bit of overlap, you're not sure which one you fall into, I would really suggest that you reach out and run it by them to make sure that you're applying to the right organization.
Okay, that's great. That's my kind of dilemma. I wasn't sure which one to go because there's kind of all three areas. Perhaps one might think, okay, maybe one of that, but I think this is a great clarification, and thank you for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Senos. And you know, I think if I can suggest weighing in, it's really thinking first about your case, so what it is you're looking for, what you think would be is really a need that is in response to COVID-19 impact, and then just looking at the different streams. And something that's been mentioned before that we really do encourage you to is reach out to whichever stream you think is a fit, and have a conversation with them, and double check and make sure and get their input and advice on whether it is the right fit.
I would also, sorry, Kathy, to jump in, but I would also suggest doing that sooner rather than later. All of this is going to be falling on their laps in the next month, and the deadline is February 21st. And I would expect that they are going to be quite busy, inundated even with questions. So their response time may be a bit slower than you might be accustomed to. And getting any of those questions into them within the next week or two, I would really strongly recommend.
Thanks, Linda. Krista going back to Krista's question, you had asked to explain the tier categories and focus areas. Krista, did you have specific questions on that, or did this question with Centers help?
I think it was the slide before this, or maybe 2 slides before. I was like, yeah, this one, like the local stream versus provincial national streams. I was writing madly, but I don't think I totally caught which is which.
Which I'm not sure which is one of these most helpful here, Emily, for putting up.
So the local stream is about having operations in a portion of the province, right? And then for tier 1, that's basically for your own organization. So maybe that's the way to look at it, as tier 1 is 1 organization, tier 2 is 2.
Okay.
Yeah. So for example, if with the national one, if we could flip to that slide, Kathy, that would be helpful. So for tier 1, again, if you're a national organization and it's just your kind of organization that will benefit, that's one thing. But if you're implementing the project and it's being implemented, as far as I understand this, let's just put that out there. If it's being implemented across, let's say you have offices in like Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, and all of those offices are going to be implementing your project, then how I understand it is that you are able to apply for a tier 2 level, right?
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Krista. There was another question. Is there any wording in the eligibility that indicates if not-profit or service cooperatives are included or excluded? Danica, would you like to expand on that at all?
Yeah, normally cooperatives just aren't allowed, or they're either explicitly excluded or there's just no language about them whatsoever. So I just was curious if there's anything in there.
There isn't. They are very clear though. Sorry, I'm trying to find the language for you. They are very clear that it can be unincorporated associations, clubs, or societies that aren't necessarily registered, but are organized and operate exclusively for social welfare, civic improvement, pleasure, recreation, or any other purpose except profit. So
perhaps is the right answer.
yeah.
Probably worth double checking before you submit, but I think it is worth looking into based on what Emily's saying. Thank you. That's good. I think, the only other thing I would add, I was having a chat with Elizabeth, who is with the local community foundation here, about odds of success and the process for determining some of these, how they're going to choose. And it's not clear. And I think it's safe to say that the different, I know here locally, they're busy trying to pull together a committee to be able to properly adjudicate the applications that come in. I think it's very difficult to say what the success rate would be, even on fantastic. They don't know what the demand is going to be like. I think it's safe to say there's going to be, it'll be competitive in terms of the volume of applicants, because the money is so amazing in terms of its scope for capacity building and being able to provide for funding to recover from COVID in a way that other grants don't necessarily allow for. So being strategic about what you do apply for, and being strategic about how you're applying and connecting with them, and putting together as strong an application as possible, I think is really wise if you're investing the time on that. But I do think that it's very exciting, as Emily and Linda mentioned earlier, we're getting a color commentary from my dog there in the back. Apologize for that. I think it is a real opportunity to be able to get access to capacity building funding that we don't always see. So definitely worth taking a look at. I'm aware that we're coming up to time here. It is 12:56. So is there any other last comments or questions? I think we'll wrap up. So I really want to thank all of you for coming.